Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Dyrenforth, and Redbridge's Kos Samaras. Each week, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations from the world of Australian and global politics, culture and ideas. Good morning and welcome back, Curtinistas. Nick Dyrenforth, head honcho of the John Curtin Research Centre and co-host of our Curtin's Cast podcast, along with my good mate, Kung Fu Kos Samaras. Good morning, Kosy. How are you?
Good morning, mate. How are you?
I'm very, very well. I'm still basking in the glory of the Brisbane Lions back-to-back premiership, but now going through withdrawal symptoms. For those of you who, unlike Kos, that the rugged individualists are collectivists at heart, fear not. Barbecue season is underway. I've got my charcoal barbecue up and firing, and cricket's not far away. Talking about cricket, we're talking to next week the real head honcho of the JCRC, Sam Al-Maliki, who actually worked for Cricket Australia, and not only that, set up Australia's first winter cricket competition, having grown up in part in Villawood Detention Centre, and his introduction to Australian life was cricket. So Stay tuned for that fantastic chat with Sam. He's got an amazing backstory, which is quite an inspiration. But today it's just Kos and I chewing the fat. Kos, we want to deep dive into the polls. Before we jump into the weekend financial review poll that you're now doing on a regular basis, Redbridge, fantastic to see Redbridge going from strength to strength. I thought it might be worthwhile just backtracking and going through the polls over the last couple of months, what they call longitudinal analysis, just to give us a sense of how we got to this point. Not good news for the Liberals, for the centre-right of politics.
Yeah, that's right. If we were to track the polls that have been conducted since the immigration rally, so 31st of August of this year, it's been about 12. I may have missed one, but I've counted about 12. All of them put Labor between 54 and 57 to 58 two-party preferred. And really, we have not seen much of a change with regards to the left side of Australian politics. So Labor's primary is in the mid-30s, Greens roughly where they've been for some time now. And, yeah, as I've just touched on before, the two-party preferred vote for Labor has not changed all that much. Still on those numbers, and with regards to the composition of that other party vote, they're going to still win a significant bag of seats if we were to have an election this weekend, based on those numbers. The big change has been the coalition's vote and how it's fragmented.
Talk us through the fragmentation, Kosy.
Yeah.
Your latest, the Redbridge Weekend Australian Financial Review, two-party preferred 54-46, major party combined vote 63. So we're, that trend of the major party primary vote declining.
That's right.
Has maintained. We've got that other vote, sort of 37%, which is big in historical terms.
That's right. It's the biggest, I think. That's actually also been reported in a poll. So what we're seeing with regards to the coalition's vote is it's fragmenting, and as we've predicted, it's fragmenting on its right flank. And it's because immigration as an issue has been elevated by elements of the right-wing commentariat and elements of what I'll define as a sort of online right-wing activist cohort. What they've done successfully is hurt the coalition. And what certain coalition MPs have done successfully is hurt their own party by running on this issue. Because what we do know, when it comes to immigration or when it comes to issues that are historically been the plaything of conservative politics, immigration, law and order, defence, these areas, these policy areas when they are elevated, they bounce really hard within conservative circles. They do not resonate with a growing number of younger Australians as an issue. Although many younger Australians will tell you, yeah, I'm concerned about population growth, I'm concerned about not being able to buy a home. But they also will tell you that that's not the main reason why they can't afford a $1.2 million home 45 kilometres out of Sydney.
Yeah.
Right? So they're a bit more switched on than I think some of the political commentary like to actually admit to themselves, that the public is actually quite switched on and smart when it comes to politics in general. So, yes, we've seen them. Well, One Nation vote's gone up to 14% in our sample. It bounces around with some other pollsters, but it's definitely increased, and it's increased largely at the expense of the coalition.
Yes. So, they're spotlighting traditional strengths of One Nation, and not unexpectedly, people are, well, they're not actually voting, but in terms of their voting intention, they're voting for the party which they most strongly identify with that particular brand of politics. It's not rocket science.
No, and what we do know is the other thing that's going on here, in addition to immigration, is that the right flank of conservative politics tends to fragment when the coalition comes across as not competent. Now, we see that at a federal level, but we've seen it in certain state jurisdictions as well. Whenever they are not competent, united, its right flank does hemorrhage, and it will hemorrhage to right-wing minor parties, and that hurts it because, again, you don't win back all of your lost votes via preferences. It's a fairly difficult situation they find themselves in because, of course, their primary vote to start off with was in the low 30s. It's now in the 20s. Will it bounce back? Look, I still think that there is a possibility come election time in 2028 that we'll see a bounce back, of course, but now that's a political landscape as we see it.
And ironically or perversely, that drift of the right flank to One Nation is being picked up by certain MPs, whether it's Matt Canavan or Andrew Hastie, and you've mentioned the advanced group without mentioning the advanced group, the Lord Voldemort of the conversation here. They're picking that up and using it as ammunition to say, yes, we've got to double down on these issues because we're bleeding votes. It's classic chicken and the egg scenario. Yeah,
there's also, I think, what is going on is what we're seeing across most Western democracies, and there is a new industry that has been born over the last, I'd say, decade, and that is what I call the right-wing commentariat. They have learned to monetize their activity online or on TV, either as pseudo-influencers in this space or whatever it is. They are very much involved in the industry of outrage, and they need that outrage to continue to make money, either to be employed or to make money as an influencer. Ben Shapiro in the US is a really good example of that. There's others around. There are many of them that fall within this sort of category, and that's how they make their money. They grifters. Make their money based. Yeah, well,
grifters.
Well, I mean, you would call that, but I think, look, in the modern world, that's a new occupation, right? And sure, I might personally not agree with their views, but that's what they do.
Yeah.
There are any left-wing versions of that?
Yeah, I think they would say no, but over in the UK on the hard far left, you've got Novara Media, and they would say, oh, no, we're as sort of pure as snow, but quite clearly they monetised the emergence
100%.
of momentum and Corbynism in the middle of the last decade and are still going strong. They monetise outrage and frustration on the left and purity, politics of purity, as I think it's best described as.
It's not as lucrative because obviously if it's on the left side of politics, it doesn't come from a part of society that has a lot of money. But the actual lucrative opportunity for those on the right is that, yes, you are appealing to parts of society that are historically cashed up. And it doesn't necessarily mean corporate Australia, because corporate Australia is definitely not in this space. They are very much in the centre. No matter what anyone would like to define them as, they do not dance with the far right in this country, and they will never will.
And of course, because this is playing out dramatically in your polling and polling of others on a demographic basis. I'm struck by looking at, deep diving into your numbers. Let's look at the coalition. Polling 16% amongst Gen Z.
Yes.
Compared to the Greens on 29%, Labor on 37%. Millennials, Labor 37, Coalition 24, Greens 13. But it's the Gen Z number which really leaps out, and it comes back to your point. Young people are not stupid. They've now, successive generations have grown up under the assumption that they're not going to own their own home, and if they're renting, they're going to get screwed. And they're not stupid. All of a sudden, they're hearing this message from some on the centre-right politics, where it's MPs, your advanced crew, your Sky After Dark coterie, saying, actually, it's the problem of so-called mass immigration and it's migrants' problem. And people are not stupid, Kos. And that's playing out in these disastrous federal vote intention numbers.
And I would say that Generation Z in this country is actually a little bit different to other Western democracies. The main reason is because of our compulsory electoral system. What we find is that, look, you'll find some very policy-engaged young people who are overwhelmingly sitting on the left side of politics. And you could see that with our sample with the Green votes, around 30%. It bubbles around that space. Amongst women, it's in the 40s. So it's very significant. And that's coming down the pipeline. That's a problem for Labor, which we should talk about. But then also what we do see is that there's a very significant other number. And you could see that in our research that was published on the weekend, which basically a group of Australians who don't define themselves with anything. But when you talk to these younger Australians who would tell you, oh, look, I don't really identify with one political doctrine over another, the best way we can define them is they're humanists. They don't like listening to political news. They don't consume news at all, actually. They are largely in the outer suburbs of our large cities, and they also push back against what I would say is the politics of grievance, politics of punishment. They know that their lives will not get better if another group of Australians is isolated and identified to be attacked. So that old world where you find a victim to distract a suffering public from their own economic woes because you don't have an economic plan, because it's fundamentally also the epicenter of the coalition's mantra right now, is that the last time they actually advocated for tax reform in this country was when John Howard was in power.
Yeah, it's 2.5 decades ago.
That's right.
Off the back of a massive majority too, which they nearly lost.
Correct. That was the last time they actually really advocated for economic reform in this country. Since then, they've been basically embroiled in one long march to oblivion, or as I like to define it, one long cultural march into a brick wall. And these younger Australians, these humanists, as I like to define, are just not into that. They're not interested. They don't like the nastiness of it. And so when they turn up to the ballot box and fill in their ballot paper, they will consciously be very careful how they vote. And they might think that Labor is no good, but they think the coalition's worse. And so they vote for the political party, or their preference to the major political party that they think will be less likely to hurt them, their family, and the community they live in. And that's it. That's where we're at. And that mindset is not changing.
Yeah. Now, this has been a crisis a couple of decades in the making. You're not alone there. Over on the centre right of political commentary, Paul Kelly, the professor from the Australian, had a big article on the weekend saying it's been 2 decades in the making. I myself have made this argument that what we're seeing now, these are Howard's chickens coming home to roost. The culture wars, the muscular nationalism of the Howard years. We had some economic reform in the first part of the Howard years and then nothing. And most dramatically, what they did on housing with capital gains, negative gearing, baking in these demand price subsidies, they've created this huge problem on the conservative side of politics, and it's all coming home to roost. And again, it comes comes through quite dramatically in the demographics. I'm looking at the demographics, Kos, and, just to come back to the dual problem that Howard created, one, some of the culture wars, the delay in inaction on climate, and some of these other related issues, created the teal movement, pushed traditional Liberal voters out. You can see that in a metropolitan, they're polling, 29% to
Yes.
Labor's 39, Greens on 13. But when you have a look at material issues like housing, it's quite clear that, the divvying and the head in the sand attitude to that, and inequality more generally, and material issues, they're getting smashed up in outer metropolitan Australia as well. Labor on 36, Libs on 27. The whole point of the Dutton campaign and the first term in opposition was apparently about appealing to the battlers in the outer suburbs. Well, it doesn't look like it's worked. In provincial Australia, they're behind as well, and only narrowly ahead in rural Australia, according to your polling, with Labor on 29 and the Coalition on 30. This is meant to be their heartland.
Yeah, I think there was an individual on the weekend that mentioned the debate that's occurring between some of our data and our presentations and our reporting, and some elements within the sort of conservative commentariat. And he made the point that younger people are leaning to the left because they have come to the conclusion that the economic system is not working for them. So their response to it is a left-wing one. It's not a conservative one. They're not interested in the culture wars. They don't think that's going to help them buy a home. And this gentleman's name is Darren Quinn. So he made a very good point, and that is he's articulated precisely why younger people, particularly that centralist group that I just talked about, why they've moved away. Because the last time, as I said, the coalition's ever done anything in the economic space has been in the early 2000s, and that was around tax reform. And then it's been basically dead quiet ever since. And that's a time when both millennial and Gen Z have come of age and have rolled to vote, have started their lives, and conservative politics since then has only done one thing consistently: culture war. That's it.
This is where I'll pull you up slightly here, Cosy, on economics, a material issue. The other thing they did, which resulted in them losing office in 2007, was work choices.
Yes.
Every now and then, they've bounced up with royal commissions into the trade union movement. They've still got their obsession with attacking superannuation, specifically industry super. If you were to identify one economic policy that's been consistent over the past few years, it would be this insane proposition that people should be drawing down on their super accounts or what's left of them after COVID to get into the housing market.
Some dark clouds on the horizon on that front, by the way.
Yes.
The research that we've done indicates that younger Australians now are increasingly more willing to dip into their super for housing and other expenses. That sentiment has shifted dramatically over the last 2 years, and that's because there is still an absence of a solution that is of significance from the Labor side. And so my warning to people within the Labor camp, if they care about the sanctity of the superannuation policy area and that industry, they need to offer up a solution to younger Australians that is beyond just, simple policy solutions. Now, housing is a wicked problem because it isn't just something the Commonwealth can fix on their own. They need the states to muscle up here as well, particularly when it comes to planning reforms. But if the coalition stumps up a policy at the next federal election that allows us younger Australians to use their super for these life-changing events, they will win votes off the back of it. Now, it won't be much, but it will be enough to bring some of that lost youth vote back to them. And so the super industry is going to have to look at different ways of communicating to younger Australians on why that shouldn't be the case and why it's a bad policy. Because right now, younger Australians have got a view. It's my money. Yes, once upon a time I thought it was a stupid idea to dip into it. But right now, there's no other ideas to counter my stupid idea.
Yeah, sage advice. The other group, which the coalition have now got a baked-in problem with, is Australians from diverse backgrounds, multicultural communities, struggling to find the right word to sort of summarise them in homogenous terms. But if you look at the vote amongst those Australians who speak English only at home, Labor leads 34-29 on a primary vote, with the Greens on 11. Then if you look at other languages, it's Labor 45.
That's right.
Coalition collapses to 23. And the Greens spike to 15.
That's right.
So huge problem there as well.
Well, it's a growing group, as we've touched on.
And I should say English only, One Nation get up to 14 there.
Yes, they do. Yes, that's right. The one thing about One Nation voters is that it's, and we could talk about what makes up the One Nation vote, because that's actually quite.
We are going to in a moment.
Yes, that's it's worthy of us spending some time on that. The problem the coalition faces is that with this particular group of Australians who speak another language other than English at home, this is a growing constituency. They're up to about 45% of the electorate already. They are significant in number in a number of electorates in Sydney and Melbourne in particular, but also in other parts of the country. And it's just going to make it a lot harder to win back urban electorates if you're polling this badly amongst this particular group of Aussies.
Can I just, you just referenced someone on Twitter. I think was it Daryl Quinn? G'day, Quinny, if you're listening. If that's your nickname, well, you've got a new nickname, Quinny. I saw another a friend of mine, I think it was Greg Connolly, put a little rejoinder to you, and he noted, and I think it might be worth responding to in some detail. He said, all the stuff we've gone through, particularly Australians from diverse backgrounds, young people, he said, well, haven't we seen this movie before? We saw it in the US of A, during the Obama years, and the Democrats and Democrat-friendly commentators ran around saying demography is destiny, young people are moving left, the Latino Hispanic vote is growing. Mm-hmm. This is going to work to the Democrats' long-term structural advantage. And then, of course, we got Trump. And what we know about Trump, certainly the last election, is he won pluralities amongst many of these constituencies, which the Democrats had convinced themselves were on the side of the demography as destiny thesis.
Yeah, there's a problem with all of that, though, and that is that we're a vastly different country. We have a compulsory voting system, means everyone's turning up, about 92%. Very different to the US. The type of younger Australians we were talking about before, Nick, the humanists that I touched on, they don't vote in the US. They don't vote in the UK. They stay home. These group of Australians don't like Trump.
Yeah,
they don't like anything to do with Trump politics. They hate it. That comes through very strongly in our polling.
Yeah, the polling we did together last year.
Yeah, that's right.
Even those attracted to Trump-style politics,
yes,
don't like that particular American spin angle.
That's right. Now, the demographic differences, though, between older Australians and younger Australians are also worth talking about just briefly to explain why we're not the US. When Gen Xers were in their 20s, the difference between the coalition and the Labor Party on primary vote was about 5%. It's about that still. Yes, some Gen Xers have become a little bit more conservative as they've gotten older, but by and large, nothing much has changed. It's a fine line contest. The numbers we're seeing with Gen Z are so big and so different, and they all vote. It's hard to see, unless something drastically happens, moving a whole bunch of left-wing young Australians to a right-wing nationalist doctrine. It's just crazy to think that's going to happen. And what has happened in the US is that Trump turned up and offered an alternate to the major party system. No matter what people may think of Hastie and so on, Hastie needs to win urban Australia. To do so, he cannot beat Trump. So he has to dance a political dance that requires it to be sellable in till seats. So all those seats they lost in 2022, they need to win some of those back. Not just Goldstein, they need to win a lot more than just Goldstein back. They need to win back seats like Menzies, seats like Bennelong, Reid, to even have a chance of getting 75 seats. So
it requires a lot of hard thinking, Kos, and right. I keep hammering this point. It's going to take a reckoning with the Howard years, because this is when, Howard, for the first 2/3 of his prime ministership, was able to bridge these constituencies in suburban, out of suburban Australia, and the inner cities, but that was breaking down by the last term. And in fact, that's why he lost his inner North Sydney seat of Bennelong, which is Labor country. But let's dig down into One Nation, Kos, because I think you're right. The problem for the Libs wanting to sort of appeal to this populist, conservative, nationalist, imagined constituency is that there is an established brand there for people to go to, and on your data, that's where they're heading. It's classic demographic trends. The older you get, the more likely you are to vote for One Nation. So One Nation amongst Gen Z, 6%, slowly increases 17% amongst boomers. As you go from inner metro areas to rural areas, One Nation vote more than doubles, from 9 to 20%.
That's right.
We know about some of the educational trends here. University degree holders polling 6%. That nearly quadruples to 22% who have less than Year 12 education qualifications. And again, to come back to the last data point that we were drilling down to, in terms of English spoken at home or otherwise, we see a flip to what we're seeing on the left side of politics. So who, Kos, in particular, is it the same people voting for One Nation that voted for flame-haired Pauline, the fish and chip shop owner, in the mid to late 1990s, or has that changed?
Many of them died since. This is what we always got to talk about, right? When we're talking about those years, we're looking at close to 1 million people who have actually passed away, who may have voted for them, or voted for John Howe when he was able to bring some of them back after Tampa. If you look at the types of seats where we would expect that vote to now increase as a result of their strong electoral position now, as a result of the coalition's right-wing fragmenting, it will be in the following seats. I did some modelling on the weekend to work out which seats we're talking about. So it's Wide Bay, Flynn, Capricornia, Dawson and Herbert in Queensland. Cowper, Hunter, Calaire in New South Wales. We'll come back to Hunter in a minute. Forrest and O'Connor in WA, Braddon and Lyons in Tasmania, and Gray in South Australia. None in Victoria. Now, come back to Hunter. What we know about some of these One Nation voters, and we see this particular group express themselves in other seats through the National Party, is that the One Nation vote could be of a significant size, but it preferences strongly to a Labor candidate. And in Hunter's case, Dan Repiccioli, they go to him in very big numbers. And so it doesn't necessarily mean they go back to the coalition. But so you look at the seats, they're basically really safe coalition electorates. That's where the movement's occurring. It's not occurring in seats that Labor cares about. And it's not occurring in the marginal seats that Labor cares about. And more importantly, it's definitely not occurring in the seats that Labor's picked up in 2022 and 2025, beyond Northern Tassie. So the urban electorates where we've covered extensively. You know, your Bennelongs, your Reeds, your Menzies, those in urban electorates, even parts of Brisbane. It's not happening. It's not moving.
Yeah.
The only thing we're seeing in those electorates is a further consolidation of the progressive vote. So again, we go back to that conversation about Gray Connolly and the demographics argument about what happened in the US. Australia is, again, a very vastly different country from a urban regional perspective. In Victoria, 80% of its population is in Melbourne. Perth, again, 80%. The lowest is in Queensland, where 55% of it is in Brisbane, and the 45 obviously outside of Brisbane. Now, if you're seeing these dynamics, as we saw in the US, where you've got this right-wing populist movement occurring in regional, declining parts of cities and towns, it's going to hurt you from the left side of politics if that's occurring in the US in a big way, and it did with Trump. But in Australia, well, we just listed the seats.
I think you're right. And again, the UK example bears this out. You've got reform going gangbusters.
Yes.
And again, one of the reasons it looks like it will pick up many seats at the next general election, but let's just put a really important qualifier. That election is still 4 years away.
That's right.
Okay? It's 4 years away. They got plenty of time to implode, plenty of time for the Conservatives to change leaders, plenty of time for Keir Starmer to get his act together. There's a bit of talk about replacing him as leader. Shabana Mahmood is one who's been mentioned in dispatches, but you've still got they may well pick up seats. Again, a different electoral system. It's not compulsory. It's first past the post.
Yes, it is.
So what scope is there for One Nation to actually, you've just taken us through the seats, what scope is there for them to actually pick up seats? And something that I've long believed is there is potential, but not with Pauline Hanson leading the party. And I think that if you look across Europe and elsewhere, were she to be replaced as leader by someone who can potentially appeal to Gen Z and millennials on some of the issues we've been talking about, material issues and housing, but then again, if they stop talking about if then it becomes a totally different entity. Then, if they're not talking about some of those nationalist, conservative, populist issues, we're talking about a whole totally different entity altogether.
I think, going back to the point that we were discussing earlier in this conversation, the dynamic which we're seeing play itself out on the right side of politics is the populist right competing against the moderate conservatives. The moderate conservatives hold some hope that they can win back urban electorates in this country. And as I touched on before, that's a pretty big strategic objective for them because that's where most of the seats are in Australia. Very different to the US and the UK. But the populist right, which is animated by the parts of the commentariat, as we touched on what their motivation is, but also parts of the coalition, they are going to be, that's why they're talking about splitting, because one group doesn't want to pursue the politics of central appeasement. They want to turn this country into one that resembles what we're seeing in the US. Well, I can assure anyone listening here that if you think that conservatives, and we could just focus on conservatives, at least a third of conservatives in this country do not like what they're seeing in the US right now. In fact, they will switch their vote to even Labor to stop someone like Trump appearing in this country. And so we could
Trump's not a conservative. That's
correct.
That's
right?
the 101 of politics here. He's not a conservative.
Yeah, and some conservatives listening to this may think to themselves, "Oh, these are two Labor guys just arguing the usual thing and spitting the usual thing." Not really. No, this is clearly going to happen if this trend continues. You will see the coalition will not split; its base is going to split. And split in a very big way, like it did for the Labor Party with the DLP split. which was more formal, but it was also sectarian. And we're going to see that split occur in this country if the current behaviour of certain coalition MPs continues and if they do not get back to talking about the economy.
Yes. Now, there's another party which has been very distracted over the past few years, particularly since the October 7 Hamas terrorist attacks in Israel and the resultant awful tragedy of the war in Gaza, which, thank God, Kos, looks like it is. There may be some kind of resolution here. Hamas are on track to release the remaining hostages, dead or alive. This is an issue which has consumed the Greens, and to my mind, they've engaged in some reckless rhetoric around this conflict. And even out in the weekend, Kos, we had them. I would have thought this is a time for sort of relief, certainly not celebration, but we're actually there's some hope here. But we had Greens MPs, including Jenny Leong, who famously talked about the Jewish lobby and its tentacles extending into every aspect of Australian society. Former Green Senator Lydia Thorpe and other activists are out there on the weekend. When we've got a ceasefire, they're still protesting, which seems to indicate that it was never just about achieving a ceasefire. But I think that the way the Greens have conducted themselves in respect to this conflict has been really dreadful for social cohesion in this country and actually bad for them politically. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out over the long run. As we've discussed, polling super well amongst Gen Z, not as well amongst millennials as I would have expected, and then they really fall off in terms of Gen X and baby boomers. The question is, Kos, are the Greens going to be able to buck that trend of people as they become older going to vote for Labor or the coalition? And it's particularly moving to the Labor pile at the moment. They're not moving to the centre-right Conservative pile. Are they going to be able to buck that trend, or is some of the conduct around the Middle East and really what was seen as a blocking role that they played in the last term of Parliament, is that a block then on the Greens vote actually be able to turn those huge numbers in and around Gen Z into a long-term structural advantage and seats at the end of the day? It's seats because they're in the parliamentary game. That's the point of being in parliamentary politics is to win seats.
Yeah, so what we know about millennials is that as they're getting older, they are becoming more conservative, but very different to older Australians. The bad news for the coalition is that they started off as young 20-something-year-olds delivering a two-party preferred vote to Labor with the Greens to the tune of about 65%. They're now sitting in the high 50s. That's about as much as it changes. So what's driving some of that change, as you touched on, is that older millennials have moved in very significant numbers to the Labor Party from the Greens. And that's happened in a very profound way in federal city of Melbourne, for example. In the southern boots of Adam Band's former electorate, that's where a lot of the pain was delivered to him. It was delivered by professional older millennials in the southern parts of the electorate, and they moved in very significant numbers to Labor. And when we've been speaking to them over the last 2 years, this is one issue that they've highlighted with us, and that is the concern they had that the Greens were participating in a form of politics which was fragmenting social cohesion in their community. And so what young progressives and now middle-aged progressives, what they've told us about their concerns about the Greens' antics in this space is that, hey, I don't disagree with what is going on over there. It needs to stop, and that it's abhorrent, and that, getting into debates about how many kids get killed is just ridiculous. What I've got concerns about is Jewish Australians being targeted over here, as if they've got anything to do with this. And we've had people in focus groups will tell us, look, the only reason they're really raising it and the reason they're protesting outside of Jewish cafes is because they're anti-Semitic, right? And so when the Greens partnered up with that, they took on what was going to be a consequence at the ballot box. And that was what we saw writ large on May the 3rd. They lost all their lower house seats, but one, as a result of their behaviour. So if they continue on with this narrative, which is blame Labor for everything, and I did notice that their leader did try to blame Labor for
the Manchester terror atrocities, cause
like
somehow Jewish people in Manchester attending Yom Kippur, the holiest day, a somber day on the Jewish calendar, somehow cause that was the fault of the Albanese Labor government, Elbow and Wong. Apparently, the terrorist Shihad al-Shami keeps a close eye on Australian foreign policy. An extraordinary comment by Larissa Waters, which the leader of the Greens, and I wrote about in the Financial Review, but symptomatic cause of the fact that they've seemed to have learnt. I call them, that they remind me of the Bourbon monarchy restored after the Napoleonic years. They've learnt nothing and they've forgotten nothing. But as I point out, and there's something that you were really onto, mate, like in last term of Parliament, there is a massive disjuncture between the Greens activist core, which includes the parliamentarians, and the base, and particularly the base amongst millennials and younger portions of Gen X, who are part of, this broad centre of Australian politics. They've got a lot of common sense. They would have looked at, the events of the last week, and Donald Trump seems to have played a critical role in actually bringing about this ceasefire. And like most normal, sensible human beings, they've gone, this is a unjustifiably good thing. And it's actually not time to hit the streets and continue to protest and essentially say, which is the message which is coming across, is the ceasefire is a bad thing. We've actually been campaigning for a ceasefire for 2 years. It's actually a bad thing. And what we're really about here is putting Israel out of business. And that's just not where the centre of Australian political life is.
No, that's right. And as we touched on before, there's going to be a political consequence for that. Especially now, if peace does, it's more of a ceasefire than a peace deal. If the ceasefire is maintained over a long period of time, then yes, those protests are going to look rather silly. We all know what's happened there. There's no debate. I think the world is pretty much unified about their view about what's happened in the Gaza Strip. It's fairly abhorrent, but it's also abhorrent targeting Jewish Australians for something that's occurring overseas. Yeah, and they have no control over.
And in the case of Larissa Waters, blaming the Labor government, blaming everyone under the sun, and the critical point, Kos, is I don't think her comments were, I think morally abhorrent. They were just wrong, and they were also politically stupid. But as I pointed out, the Finner Review, mate, I don't think she can backtrack because of that activist core. There'd be a revolt. That's a wicked problem for the Greens if you cannot acknowledge that you've blundered rhetorically and not able to qualify your remarks. That's a big problem.
They need to become a lot more moderate in that space and a lot more mature in their politics and the way they deliver it if they want to hold on to the very, very significant structural advantage they now have in place amongst Generation Z women in particular. And it's pretty significant. And if it is maintained, they will win seats back. But they can only do that if they actually start behaving like a party that is probably not formally in alliance with Labor, but one that is in the business of preventing the Conservatives from being re-elected. If they pull that mantra off, they will win seats back. They will be given a license to represent progressive young professionals in our big cities, again, in the lower house.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just, again, to dig down, I'm looking at the gender split. Women, 13% of that Greens primary vote, but then it dips to 8% amongst men.
Yes, correct.
So the advice I would have thought would be get back to talking about the environment, which is not just about climate change, the environment generally speaking. Get back to talking about if the big material issue, climate is a material issue. Talking about intergenerational equality with housing front and centre.
Yes, correct. And that is fundamentally the epicenter of every young person's concern. And that is the intergenerational equality that they are facing, in years to come. And they firmly believe is entrenched and firmly believe is a result of an established societal problem that no one wants to deal with. So if they get back to that, we might be having a very different discussion in 2028 about their electoral fortunes.
Indeed we will. And I'm firmly of the belief, Kos, that we're out of time. We will pick up many of the threads of this conversation, housing and climate and intergenerational equity, with the real head honcho of the JCRC, Sam El-Maliki, next week. But for now, Curtinistas, that's all we have time for. Check us out. Refer a mate, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. But for now, it's ciao and a bit of a dirt cheer.